December 31st, 2019, the last day of the year. For most people, it was a time of celebration, parties, and resolutions. For me, it was just another day, another reminder of what I had lost. My husband, Michael, had died the year before in a snowstorm. That endless biting wind had taken him from me, and I had lived alone ever since in a small house tucked away in a quiet corner of Canada. I always spent winters with my parents in Skagway, Alaska. It was our tradition. They had an old, cozy home surrounded by dense woods, the perfect place to escape the harshness of life. But last night, a snowstorm roared through my area and I found myself trapped inside. The storm rattled the windows and howled like a wild beast outside. I stayed in my bedroom on the first floor, sipping tea and trying to ignore the loneliness that settled over me like the snow outside. Around midnight, a strange sound pierced through the chaos of the storm, the creak of a door opening. My breath caught in my throat. I was certain I had locked all the doors. I tiptoed to my bedroom door and strained to hear over the wind. The sound didn't repeat, but my imagination ran wild. I stayed awake for hours, my ears tuned to every creak and groan of the house. Morning came, and when I finally ventured downstairs, the front door was locked, just as I'd left it. I laughed nervously to myself, brushing it off as the wind. "You're being paranoid," I muttered. With the storm subsided, I packed my things, eager to leave the house behind for a while. I loaded my car, double-checked the locks, and began the long drive to my parents' home. The journey was uneventful until I arrived in Skagway late that evening. The road to my parents' house ended at the edge of the forest. From there, a narrow, snow-laden path wound between tall, shadowy trees. It was always a peaceful walk, but that night the air felt different, heavier, as I trudged through the snow, dragging my suitcase behind me. I noticed a figure ahead. A man in a hoodie stood among the trees, watching me. His face was obscured by the shadow of his hood, but his posture was tense, deliberate. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart pounding. "Hello!" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. He didn't respond, just stared. There was something eerily familiar about him, but I couldn't place it. After a moment he turned and walked deeper into the woods, vanishing from sight. I hurried the rest of the way to my parents' house, my mind racing. Who was he? Why did he seem so familiar? For the next few days I tried to push the memory of the hooded man out of my mind. My parents' house was warm and welcoming, and it felt good to be surrounded by family, but the unease lingered. Then my boss called. "We're facing some unexpected issues," he explained. "I'm sorry, but we need you back. Can you cut your vacation short?" Reluctantly, I packed up and drove back home. It was late evening when I started, and by the time I arrived, it was nearly 2 in the morning. The house greeted me with an unsettling stillness, as if it had been waiting. I stepped inside and immediately noticed something strange. A pair of coffee cups sat on the living room table. I distinctly remembered washing and putting them away before I left. My stomach tightened. Was someone here while I was gone? Or had I just forgotten? The thought of being so careless bothered me almost as much as the idea of an intruder. Shaking it off, I went upstairs and locked my bedroom door. Sleep came fitfully, and at 3 in the morning, I woke to the sound of crying. It was faint at first, like a whisper carried on the wind. I sat up, my heart racing. It was coming from downstairs. As I strained to listen, the sound grew louder, more distinct. A low, mournful sobbing echoed through the house. My blood ran cold as I recognized the voice. It sounded like Michael. I leapt out of bed, barely bothering to grab a flashlight. I rushed downstairs, calling his name, even though I knew it couldn't be him. The living room was empty. The crying stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. I turned to head back upstairs, but as I reached the bottom step, I froze. Footsteps behind me. I spun around, and there he was, the man from the woods. He stood in the dim light of the living room, his hood pushed back to reveal his face. It was Michael, but it wasn't. His skin was pale, his eyes hollow and unblinking. Frost clung to his hair and eyelashes, and his lips were tinged blue. He stared at me with an expression that was almost sorrowful, but there was something else beneath it, a darkness, an unnatural hunger. I stumbled backward, my knees buckling. The room spun and I hit the floor hard. When I woke, sunlight streamed through the windows. I was lying on the living room floor, my body aching from the fall. The house was silent, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness. I sat up slowly, my mind reeling. Had it been a dream? A hallucination? I scoured the house from top to bottom, but there was no sign of anyone else. No wet footprints, Frost nothing. The coffee cups were still on the table, and everything else was exactly as I had left it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That afternoon I packed a bag and left the house. I didn't care about work or the possibility of losing my job. I just needed to be somewhere else, anywhere else. I called my friend Helena, who lived in a nearby apartment complex. She welcomed me with open arms, no questions asked. As I settled into her spare bedroom that evening, I felt a small measure of relief. The house was behind me, and with it, whatever had haunted me. But even now, as I write this, I can't help but wonder, was it really Michael? If it was, what did he want? Why? Why did he come back? And most chilling of all, will he come back again? I'm not sure I want to know the answer. Before we get into the next story, if you've come for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share these stories with your friends and family. Thanks. It's strange how the city that never sleeps can feel so empty. New Year's Eve in New York City is a raucous symphony of cheering crowds, honking horns, and the occasional drunken serenade. But up here, 20 floors above the madness, it's a different world. Chaos. It's just me. The office is quiet, save for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. I should have been with friends, or at least sipping champagne at home while watching the ball drop on TV. Instead, I was here, poring over spreadsheets and ledgers to close the books for the year. Being the manager of a mid-sized finance company meant that when deadlines loomed, my social life took a back seat. Everyone else had left by 5 p.m., eager to escape before the city descended into its annual madness. Even the cleaning staff had clocked out early, leaving the office eerily sterile and devoid of life. I didn't mind, or at least I told myself I didn't. I liked the quiet, but the quiet has a way of shifting, morphing into something heavier when you're alone. By the time the clock hit 10 p.m., I was neck-deep in reconciling accounts. The glow of the computer screen painted the room in cold light. The windows framed the distant glitter of the city, but up here I may as well have been on the moon. I heard it then, a noise faint but unmistakable, a muffled thump. I froze, fingers hovering over the keyboard. My first thought was the HVAC system. It had been acting up lately, coughing and groaning like an old man, but this sound was different, deliberate, a rhythmic scuff, like footsteps, faint but steady. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I had left a window cracked somewhere and the wind had nudged a door, or maybe the building itself was just settling. Then I heard it again, closer. I stood up, my heart hammering against my ribs. The floor was supposed to be empty. I hadn't seen anyone else in the lobby when I came in, and the elevator required a key card for after-hours access. Grabbing my phone, I turned on the flashlight and stepped into the hallway. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating rows of cubicles and the break room door slightly ajar. The air felt different out here, colder, heavier, like the building itself was holding its breath. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding weaker than I intended. No response. I inched toward the break room, each step a battle against the knot of fear tightening in my chest. As I reached the door, I pushed it open slowly, the hinges whining in protest. The room was empty, save for the faint smell of burnt coffee. I was about to turn back when I noticed something strange. The window by the sink was open, wide open. The January air seeping through it felt like ice against my skin. Someone was here. A sound from the far end of the hallway made me spin around, my flashlight catching the edge of movement. Just a flicker, like the tail of a shadow disappearing around a corner. "Hey, who's there?" I cursed myself for the panic in my voice. I sounded more like prey than someone in charge. Footsteps echoed in the darkness now, quick and purposeful. I followed them, my pulse thundering in my ears. When I reached the corner, I stopped, pressing my back against the wall. Slowly, I peeked around. And there he was, a man dressed in dark clothing stood by the office supply closet. His back was to me, but I could see the bulging bag slung over his shoulder and the glint of metal at his side.